"Get back! The house is going to collapse any second!" Jason Callahan shouted over the roaring flames, his voice nearly lost in the chaos. The fire had swallowed most of the two-story home in Cedar Grove, a quiet town in Wisconsin, where houses sat nestled among old oak trees and neighbors looked out for each other. Tonight, however, the peace was shattered by the crackling inferno and the wail of sirens. Firefighters worked tirelessly, blasting water into the firestorm, but the blaze had a life of its own, refusing to be tamed so easily. Jason clenched his fists, his heart pounding. He had been the first to call 911 when he saw the flames licking up the side of his neighbor's home. He had run to help, managing to get Sarah and her two children, Ella and Tommy, out just in time. Their father, a truck driver, was away on a long haul. Jason had barely gotten them to safety when the front of the house collapsed in on itself. "Is everyone out?" one of the firefighters called as they adjusted their oxygen mask. Jason turned to Sarah, who was clutching Tommy tightly to her chest, while Ella sobbed into her mother's sleeve. "Are you sure everyone's out?" Sarah's face was streaked with soot and tears. "I think so. A bark cut through the night. Jason's stomach dropped. "Duke!" Sarah gasped. "Where's Duke?" Before Jason could react, there was a flash of golden fur bolting toward the flames. Duke, the family's loyal golden retriever, slipped out of Ella's grip and sprinted straight into the house. "Duke, no!" Sarah screamed. Jason lunged after the dog, but Duke was too fast. He disappeared through the burning doorway. Smoke swirled in thick clouds, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The firefighters turned, stunned. "He'll never make it out of there," one of them shouted. "We can't go in after him." Sarah collapsed onto her knees, sobbing. Ella wailed into her mother's shirt, and Tommy just stared in shock. The sight of the golden retriever disappearing into the flames had turned the night into a nightmare. Jason couldn't move. His gut told him Duke wasn't coming back. He had seen fires like this before. No one could survive in there. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The fire roared on, the orange glow lighting up the sky. Then, just when Jason was about to turn away, something moved in the doorway. A shape emerged from the flames. Duke. Gasps filled the night air, but Duke wasn't alone. Clutched in his jaws, covered in soot and unmoving, was a small bundle of fur. The firefighters reacted instantly. One rushed forward, scooping Duke and his cargo away from the collapsing house. Another grabbed a blanket and wrapped the tiny creature inside. Jason blinked. "What is that?" The firefighter holding the bundle turned, and for a moment, the entire world stood still. "It's a kitten." A hush fell over the gathered crowd. Duke, panting heavily, lay on the pavement, his fur blackened in places, his chest heaving, but he wagged his tail. The tiny kitten, barely bigger than Jason's hand, twitched its nose and let out the weakest mew he had ever heard. Sarah gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Ella had stopped crying, staring wide-eyed at the kitten, while Tommy reached out a hesitant finger. Jason crouched beside Duke, rubbing the dog's head. "You crazy, incredible dog." Duke licked Jason's hand, then turned his tired eyes toward the kitten, as if making sure it was safe. The firefighters checked the kitten quickly, confirming that it was weak, but alive. They wrapped it in a warm towel and handed it to Sarah, who cradled it like a newborn. "Where did he even find it?" one of the firefighters asked, shaking their head in amazement. Jason exhaled, finally allowing his heart rate to slow. "I have no idea, but that's Duke for you." Duke closed his eyes, his tail still wagging. The fire raged on, but for one small moment, hope burned even brighter. As the flames began to wane and the firefighters finally gained control of the inferno, the neighborhood buzzed with a mixture of relief and amazement. Neighbors who had been drawn out of their homes by the commotion gathered at a safe distance, their murmured conversations weaving together a tapestry of shock and admiration. Duke was now the center of attention, though the golden retriever himself seemed unfazed by the hero worship. Jason stood to the side, arms crossed, silently watching as Sarah and her children cradled the soot-streaked kitten. Tommy was finally smiling, his tiny hands petting the kitten's head, while Ella whispered to it, promising it a loving home. Sarah, meanwhile, kept one hand on Duke, her voice soft as she murmured her gratitude. "You're one incredible dog, you know that?" Sarah said, her tone filled with awe. Duke wagged his tail slowly, his tongue lolling out as he leaned into her touch. His fur was still singed in places, but the light in his eyes was steady. It was as if he knew he had done something extraordinary, but wasn't about to make a big fuss about it. Jason shook his head and approached, squatting down beside Duke. "I don't know how you managed it, buddy," he said, scratching Duke's neck, "but you just became this town's biggest hero." The firefighters finally approached, their heavy boots crunching on the charred remnants of what was once the front lawn. The chief, a grizzled man named Roy, removed his helmet and crouched down to inspect Duke more closely. He gave the dog a serious look before nodding, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Well, I'll be," Roy said. "You don't see that every day. A dog running into a burning house to save a kitten? That's something to remember." One of the younger firefighters, still adjusting his oxygen tank, chuckled. "Maybe we should put him on the crew. I've never seen anyone move that fast." The neighbors laughed, and the tension in the air began to ease. People were already taking out their phones, snapping pictures of Duke and the kitten. Some were calling friends, sharing the unbelievable story. "Duke's always been a good dog," Sarah said, tears still glistening in her eyes. "But tonight, he showed us something truly amazing." Jason nodded, glancing at the house. The flames had reduced it to a smoldering skeleton, but it didn't matter. Everyone was safe, and that was what counted. As far as he was concerned, Duke had done more than just save a kitten. He had given everyone a reason to believe in miracles. The town of Cedar Grove wasn't known for much. It was a small, quiet place where the biggest events were the annual 4th of July parade and the occasional farmers market. But now, with Duke's act of heroism, the town had a story that would be told for years to come. In the following days, the story spread beyond Cedar Grove. Local news stations came out to interview Sarah, Jason, and the firefighters. They filmed Duke lounging in the yard, the kitten perched on a soft blanket beside him. Jason found himself on camera more than once, recounting the night's events with the same amazement he had felt in the moment. "I saw him run into that burning house," Jason told one reporter, his hands gesturing animatedly. "And honestly, I thought he wasn't coming back out. But then he reappeared with that kitten in his mouth, and it was like something out of a movie." Sarah, holding the kitten, now named Ember, beamed as she spoke. "We owe Duke so much. He's not just a pet to us, he's a member of the family. What he did that night showed us the best of what animals can be. He's our hero." The footage of Duke and Ember played on repeat across local channels. Soon, the story caught the attention of national outlets. Morning shows invited Sarah and her children to share their experience. Duke became a household name, his picture plastered on social media and websites. Fans sent letters and packages, offering treats, toys, and even custom-made collars. A local bakery made a Duke's Hero biscuit, donating proceeds to the town's animal shelter. Jason watched all of this with a mix of pride and disbelief. He had always loved animals, but Duke had shown him just how extraordinary they could be. The dog had taught him that bravery wasn't confined to humans, and that sometimes the most incredible acts of courage came from the unlikeliest places. As the weeks went on, life in Cedar Grove began to settle back into its usual rhythm. The house would take months to rebuild, but Sarah and her family were staying with relatives nearby. Ember grew stronger every day, her fur shiny and her tiny paws playful as she pounced on Duke's tail. The two had become inseparable, a pair that seemed destined to be together. Jason often found himself at Sarah's temporary home, helping out with repairs and bringing Duke along for visits. It was during one of these visits, as he watched Ember curl up next to Duke on the porch, that he realized how much the dog had changed not just the family's life, but his own. Duke had shown him the power of loyalty, the importance of stepping up in moments of crisis, and the simple beauty of a selfless act. One sunny afternoon, as Jason sat on the porch with a cold glass of lemonade, Sarah joined him. She set a plate of cookies on the table and leaned back in her chair, her face relaxed for the first time in weeks. "I still can't believe it sometimes," she said, looking at Duke and Ember. "He ran into that fire without a second thought. It's almost as if he knew he had to do it." Jason nodded. "He did what needed to be done. It's as simple as that." Sarah glanced at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jason, for everything. I don't know how we would have gotten through this without you." He shrugged, smiling. "I think Duke deserves most of the credit." They both laughed, and for a moment the weight of recent events lifted. In that instant, Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose. The town, the neighbors, even the reporters, they had all seen what a single act of courage could do. It was a reminder that hope could shine through even the darkest times, and that sometimes the greatest heroes walked on four legs. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the town in shades of gold, Jason looked out over Cedar Grove and felt a deep sense of peace. Duke lay contentedly at his feet, Ember nestled beside him. The world was still full of challenges, but Jason knew one thing for certain. As long as there were souls willing to act with bravery and kindness, there would always be hope. As winter crept into Cedar Grove, the town's usual stillness was disrupted by a flurry of activity. Snow dusted the rooftops and blanketed the ground in a pristine white layer, but the buzz of excitement surrounding Duke's heroics still lingered in the frosty air. People stopped Jason in the street to ask about Duke, while children pestered their parents to visit Sarah's temporary house just to catch a glimpse of the dog and his little feline friend, Ember. Jason found himself navigating a strange new world where Duke wasn't just his trusty companion anymore. He was a local celebrity. Invitations poured in for community events, from elementary school assemblies to the annual Christmas tree lighting ceremony. Every time Duke made an appearance, people gathered around with cameras, hoping to capture a moment with the heroic golden retriever. Jason couldn't help but feel a bit overwhelmed by all the attention, but he knew it was all for a good cause. The local animal shelter, inspired by Duke's story, launched a campaign to encourage pet adoptions and responsible animal care. They set up booths at every event Duke attended, handing out brochures and accepting donations. Jason and Sarah teamed up to help out, bringing Duke and Ember along to show what could happen when pets and people formed a bond of trust and love. Despite the constant stream of events, Jason made sure Duke still had plenty of time to just be a dog. They went on long walks through the snow-covered woods behind Jason's house, the kind of walks that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with Cedar Grove in the first place. Duke would bound through the snowdrifts, kicking up sprays of white powder, while Ember trotted along behind, her tiny paws leaving delicate tracks in the snow. It was during those quiet moments, away from the cameras and the crowds, that Jason felt most at peace. Sarah's children, Ella and Tommy, had taken to calling Duke Super Dog. Every time they saw him, they'd run up with giggles and hugs, sometimes draping a little red cape over his shoulders. Duke would endure it with a patient expression, his tail wagging gently as if he understood that this was just another way he could bring happiness to those around him. Ember, meanwhile, had become the family's little shadow, curling up on Sarah's lap during movie nights and batting at Ella's yarn when she tried to knit. The bond between the children, the kitten, and Duke grew stronger every day. With each passing week, the story of Duke and Ember's incredible rescue became a kind of folklore in Cedar Grove. Parents told their kids the tale before bedtime, spinning it into a lesson about bravery and kindness. It wasn't just a story about a dog and a kitten anymore. It was a story about the community coming together, about neighbors helping each other in times of crisis, and about the extraordinary courage that could be found in the most unexpected places. The holidays added another layer of magic to the story. The town square was transformed into a winter wonderland, with twinkling lights strung across every tree and lamppost. The annual Christmas parade included a special float dedicated to Duke, complete with a giant paw-shaped sign that read, "Cedar Grove's Hero." Jason and Sarah rode on the float, with Duke and Ember by their sides, waving at the crowds that lined the streets. As they passed, children cheered and threw confetti, their faces lighting up at the sight of their favorite four-legged hero. While the parade was the highlight of the season, Jason found himself most moved by the quiet moments. On Christmas Eve, he joined Sarah and her children for a simple dinner at their temporary home. The table was adorned with homemade decorations, and the air was filled with the warm scent of cinnamon and pine. Duke lay near the fireplace, his golden fur glowing in the firelight, while Ember batted at a shiny ornament hanging from the tree. It was in that cozy setting, surrounded by people who had become like family, that Jason realized just how much his life had changed since that fateful night. After dinner, Jason stepped outside for a moment, taking in the stillness of the snow-covered landscape. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a gentle glow over the town. He could see the charred remains of Sarah's old house in the distance, now covered in snow. The sight brought a pang of sadness, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they had all made it through, thanks to Duke. "Hey," Sarah's voice called softly from the doorway. She stepped outside, wrapping a scarf around her neck. "You okay?" Jason turned and smiled. "Yeah, just thinking about everything that's happened. It's been a lot." She nodded, her breath visible in the cold night air. "It really has. But you know what? We're lucky. Lucky to be here, lucky to have each other. And lucky to have Duke." Jason chuckled. "You're right about that. He's one of a kind." They stood there for a while, watching the snow fall silently around them. In that moment, it didn't matter that the house still needed rebuilding, or that the road ahead would be long. What mattered was that they had come through the fire together, stronger and more united than ever. By the time spring arrived, Cedar Grove had fully embraced its newfound identity as the home of the hero dog. The local diner had renamed their signature burger the Duke Deluxe, and the coffee shop offered a special Ember Latte. Tourists began visiting the town just to see the places they'd heard about on the news, from the fire station to the park, where Duke and Ember often played. The influx of visitors provided a small economic boost, helping local businesses and giving the town a renewed sense of pride. The animal shelter's adoption rates soared, with families coming from miles around to adopt pets after hearing Duke's story. Volunteers poured in, eager to support the shelter's efforts. It became a community-wide initiative, with schools, businesses, and churches pitching in to improve the lives of animals in need. Duke's story had sparked something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. For Jason, the biggest change was within himself. He had always cared about animals, but now he felt a deeper sense of responsibility. Duke's courage had reminded him of the importance of kindness, not just toward pets, but toward everyone. He found himself reaching out more, getting involved in community projects, and building stronger connections with his neighbors. It was as if Duke's act of bravery had set off a ripple effect, spreading goodness throughout the town. Of course, Duke and Ember remained blissfully unaware of their celebrity status. For them, life was about the simple joys, playing in the yard, lounging in the sun, and curling up on the couch at night. Ember grew into a sleek, playful cat who loved to pounce on Duke's tail, while Duke remained as loyal and gentle as ever, always looking out for his little feline friend. Every so often, Jason would look at Duke and wonder how one dog could have made such a difference. But then he'd remember that it wasn't just the act of running into a burning house that mattered. It was the love and loyalty behind it. Duke's heroism had inspired people to be better, to care more deeply, and to find hope even in the darkest times. In Cedar Grove, life went on as it always had. But now there was a sense of pride and purpose that hadn't been there before. The town would never forget the night Duke ran into the flames, and they'd never forget the lessons he taught them. And as the seasons turned, as snow gave way to spring flowers and summer sunsets, Jason knew that the bond he shared with Duke was something truly special. It was a bond that had changed not just his life, but the lives of everyone in Cedar Grove. And it all started with a dog who simply refused to give up. As the summer sun warmed the town of Cedar Grove, life seemed to settle into a comfortable rhythm. The children in the neighborhood spent their days running barefoot through the grass, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Duke and Ember remained a pair of local legends, their bond now as famous as the daring rescue that had brought them together. And for Jason, the summer brought not only a sense of normalcy, but also a renewed appreciation for the quiet joys of life in this small town. Jason had been volunteering more regularly at the local animal shelter. The campaign that had begun after Duke's story went viral had blossomed into a full-fledged movement. People from surrounding towns now visited Cedar Grove's shelter, eager to adopt pets, donate supplies, or lend a hand. Jason found himself spending long afternoons cleaning kennels, walking dogs, and chatting with potential adopters. He'd never considered himself much of an activist, but he couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing so many animals find loving homes. Sarah, too, had embraced the community's renewed energy. Her temporary home was still the family's base of operations, while the rebuilding project continued, but she had thrown herself into organizing events and fundraisers for the shelter. Every weekend, she hosted a pop-up adoption fair on the front lawn. Duke and Ember were the main attractions, drawing in families and children who wanted to meet the famous pair. The fairs had become a neighborhood tradition, a place where people gathered to share stories, enjoy homemade lemonade, and find their new furry companions. Ella and Tommy had taken on the role of junior ambassadors for the shelter. They helped set up the adoption booths, passed out flyers, and spent hours playing with the adoptable pets. Ella, who had always been shy around strangers, now seemed to light up when she spoke about the animals. She'd learned to tell each dog's story, sharing details about their personalities and what kind of home would suit them best. Tommy, meanwhile, had appointed himself as Ember's official playmate, keeping the kitten entertained while his mother and sister worked. One Saturday afternoon, as the adoption fair was winding down, Jason found himself sitting on the porch with Sarah, watching the kids chase Ember across the yard. Duke lay at their feet, his head resting on his paws, his tail swishing contentedly against the porch floorboards. "You've done something really amazing here," Jason said, glancing over at Sarah. She smiled, a hint of weariness in her eyes. "I think we all have. None of this would have happened without you and Duke. You're the ones who started it all." Jason shook his head. "Duke's the real hero. I'm just along for the ride." Sarah laughed. "Modesty doesn't suit you, Jason. You've been here every step of the way. You've given your time, your energy, and your heart. That matters." Jason didn't know how to respond. He was used to being the guy who helped out behind the scenes, who showed up when people needed him but never sought the spotlight. Yet here he was, a central figure in a movement that had brought the community closer together. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light over the yard, Jason realized something. He hadn't just been helping out at the shelter. He'd been finding his place in the town, in the lives of the people around him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he truly belonged. The weeks turned into months, and the rebuilding of Sarah's house progressed steadily. Local contractors, many of whom had been touched by Duke's story, offered their services at reduced rates. Neighbors stopped by regularly to lend a hand, painting walls, hammering nails, and bringing home-cooked meals to the work site. It wasn't just a construction project. It was a community effort. Duke and Ember became regular fixtures at the site, lounging in the shade while the work went on around them. Duke seemed to understand that this house was special, that it was more than just a structure. It was a symbol of everything they'd overcome, of the strength and love that had carried them through the toughest times. One afternoon, as Jason was helping a crew install kitchen cabinets, he overheard a conversation between two volunteers. "Can you believe how much this town has changed since that fire?" one of them said. The other nodded. "It's like everyone woke up to what really matters. People aren't just keeping to themselves anymore. They're pitching in, looking out for each other. It's kind of beautiful." Jason couldn't help but smile. The fire had been a tragedy, but it had also been a catalyst for something extraordinary. It had reminded everyone of the importance of community, of the strength that came from standing together. And at the heart of it all was Duke, the dog who had inspired it all. As the house neared completion, Sarah began planning a housewarming party to thank everyone who had helped. She wanted it to be more than just a celebration of the new home. She wanted it to be a celebration of the town's resilience and spirit. Jason offered to help, and together they worked on invitations, decorations, and a menu that would accommodate the entire neighborhood. The party, held on a crisp autumn afternoon, was a resounding success. The yard was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of barbecued food. Children played games on the lawn, while adults mingled and admired the finished house. Duke and Ember, as always, were the stars of the show. People took turns petting them, posing for pictures, and telling them what good friends they were. Jason stood by the newly finished porch, a plate of food in hand, watching the scene unfold. It was everything he could have hoped for. A community united, a family back in their home, and a reminder of the good that could come from even the darkest of times. As the sun set and the party wound down, Sarah approached Jason, a glass of sparkling cider in her hand. "Thank you," she said simply. Jason raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For being there when we needed you," she said. "For helping us find our way again. You didn't have to do any of this, but you did, and it means more than I can put into words." Jason felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of gratitude, to being seen as more than just a guy who helped out. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm just glad I could be a part of it. It's been an honor." Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening. "You're not just a part of it, Jason. You're a part of our family." Those words stayed with him as the evening wore on. As the last guests left and the yard fell silent, Jason sat on the porch steps, Duke by his side. Ember had curled up on a chair, her tiny form rising and falling with each breath. Jason looked down at Duke and ruffled the fur on his head. "Well, buddy, we did it." Duke thumped his tail against the step, his brown eyes warm and steady. Jason smiled. He knew the journey wasn't over, not for Sarah, not for the town, and not for himself. But that was okay. They had made it this far, and with Duke by his side, he knew they could handle whatever came next. The days grew shorter, and the crisp autumn air turned brisk as Cedar Grove prepared for the winter months. The transition from summer's carefree days to the cooler, more contemplative season brought a change of pace to the little town. Yet the buzz surrounding Duke and Ember showed no signs of fading. If anything, their bond had become the beating heart of a story that refused to stop inspiring those who heard it. Jason found himself once again at the local animal shelter, this time helping out with their new winter preparation program. The shelter had used the surge of donations to insulate kennels, provide thicker bedding, and stockpile supplies for the colder weather. On this particular day, Jason was installing heated mats in the outdoor runs to ensure the animals would stay warm even on the chilliest nights. As he worked, he thought about how different things had been just a year ago. Back then, he'd spent most of his days quietly going through the motions of small-town life. Now, every morning felt like a new opportunity. He had a purpose, a community, and a sense of fulfillment he hadn't realized he was missing. And at the center of it all was Duke, who was currently lying under a tree nearby, watching Jason work with a calm, steady gaze. "You know," said Erin, the shelter's director, as she approached him with a cup of steaming coffee, "we wouldn't have been able to do half of this without you and Duke." Jason accepted the coffee, smiling. "I think you're giving me too much credit. Duke's the real star." "Well, yes, but you're the one who keeps showing up. And trust me, that means a lot." Jason shrugged, taking a sip. "It just feels good to help. And honestly, I like being here. The animals are great company." Erin laughed. "They are, aren't they? Unconditional love, wagging tails, and the occasional purring lap warmer. What's not to love?" Jason nodded, watching as a few of the shelter's dogs played together in the yard. "It's amazing how much these animals can teach us. They don't hold grudges. They don't worry about the future. They just live in the moment and love with their whole hearts." Erin's smile softened. "I think that's why people connected so strongly with Duke and Ember's story. It reminded them of what's really important." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the happy barks and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Jason thought about what Erin had said. She was right. Duke and Ember had shown everyone the power of compassion and bravery. And though the initial wave of media attention had faded, the lasting impact on the community remained strong. As winter approached, so did new challenges. The animal shelter's increased visibility had brought in more animals, many of them rescues from less fortunate situations. It meant more work for the staff and volunteers, but also more opportunities to change lives. Jason threw himself into these efforts, dedicating long hours to making sure every animal was cared for. Duke and Ember often accompanied him. Ember, now a full-grown cat, had developed a regal air. She walked around the shelter as if she owned the place, greeting each new arrival with a gentle nuzzle or a playful swat of her paw. Duke, ever patient and friendly, acted as a calming presence. Nervous dogs seemed to relax when Duke was around, sensing his gentle spirit. One particular evening, as Jason finished cleaning up the shelter's main office, Erin called him over. She held a bundle of papers and had a hopeful look on her face. "We've been thinking about expanding our outreach," she said. "There are so many rural areas nearby with no animal services at all. I was wondering if you'd be interested in helping us start a mobile adoption unit." Jason tilted his head. "A mobile adoption unit?" "Yes," Erin said, her excitement growing. "We'd retrofit a van with kennels, supplies, and adoption materials. Then we could travel to those underserved areas and bring the animals to the people. It's ambitious, but I think it could make a huge difference." Jason thought about it for a moment. The idea intrigued him, not just because it was something new and exciting, but because it felt like a natural extension of the work they were already doing. "Count me in," he said. "When do we start?" Erin grinned. "We'll start planning tomorrow." "Thank you, Jason. This is going to be incredible." The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Jason found himself in meetings, brainstorming sessions, and fundraisers. The community rallied around the idea, eager to see the mobile unit come to life. By the time the first snowflakes began to fall, they had secured enough funding to purchase a second-hand van and start the retrofit process. Duke and Ember were, of course, a part of every step. Duke sat quietly during meetings, his presence reassuring, while Ember had a habit of perching on Jason's shoulder as he took notes. Their involvement was a reminder of why they were doing all of this, to give animals a chance at a better life. As the mobile adoption unit took shape, Jason found himself reflecting on how far they'd come. What had started as a single, miraculous rescue had grown into a movement that was changing lives every day. He couldn't have predicted any of this a year ago, but now he couldn't imagine life without it. When the mobile unit finally rolled out for its first event, the turnout was overwhelming. Families from nearby towns lined up to meet the animals, and by the end of the day, dozens of pets had found new homes. Jason watched as children hugged their new companions, as older couples smiled warmly at the dogs and cats they'd decided to adopt. It was a scene that filled him with a sense of pride and purpose. Duke and Ember were there too, as always. Duke mingled with the crowd, accepting pats and belly rubs, while Ember claimed a spot on the van's dashboard, observing everything with her usual regal demeanor. Their presence was a reminder of the journey that had brought them all to this moment. As the sun set on that first mobile event, Jason sat on the back step of the van, watching families walk away with their new pets. Erin joined him, her face glowing with satisfaction. "We did it," she said softly. Jason smiled. "Yeah, we did." The mobile adoption unit became a regular part of the shelter's efforts. They traveled to new towns, met new people, and gave more animals a chance at a better life. Jason often drove the van himself, with Duke riding shotgun and Ember perched on the dashboard. Each trip felt like a new adventure, a chance to make a difference. Through it all, the community's bond only grew stronger. Cedar Grove had become a hub of kindness, compassion, and hope. And though Jason sometimes wondered how long they could keep up this level of energy and dedication, he knew that as long as Duke and Ember were by his side, they could face any challenge that came their way. And so, the story continued. With every new adoption, every new life saved, and every new person inspired by the unwavering bond between a dog and a cat. Duke and Ember had started something that showed no signs of slowing down, and Jason felt grateful every single day to be a part of it. As the first frost settled over Cedar Grove, the rhythm of daily life in the town seemed to mirror the changing season. The days were quieter, more reflective. People bundled up in heavy coats, their breath visible in the morning air, and the streets, now dusted with a light layer of snow, were lined with festive decorations. Yet, even as the town moved closer to the end of the year, the impact of Duke and Ember's story continued to resonate. For Jason, every day still started with the same routine: a long walk with Duke before heading to the animal shelter. But as much as he appreciated these calm mornings, he couldn't ignore the sense of urgency that had crept into his work. The mobile adoption unit, now a regular fixture in their efforts, had revealed just how much need there was beyond the borders of Cedar Grove. Each time they set up in a new location, the van was met with more animals in need, more stories of neglect and abandonment, and more people hoping to make a difference. On a cold Tuesday morning, Jason arrived at the shelter to find Erin waiting for him by the front door. Her breath puffed out in small clouds as she shifted from foot to keep warm. She waved him over, a folder clutched tightly in her gloved hands. "Good morning," Jason said, giving Duke's leash a light tug to keep him from investigating a snowbank. "Morning. I need to show you something," Erin said. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and concern. Inside the shelter, Erin laid the folder on the main desk and opened it to reveal a stack of papers. Jason leaned in, curious. "We've been tracking the numbers from the mobile unit," Erin began. "Adoptions are up, which is amazing, but we're also seeing an increase in the number of animals being surrendered in these outlying areas. Some of these places have no services at all. No shelters, no rescues, nothing. We're getting calls from people desperate for help, but we can only do so much." Jason nodded slowly. He'd seen the growing need firsthand, and it weighed on him. "What do you think we should do?" "I've been working on a proposal," Erin said, tapping the papers. "It's ambitious, but I think we could start a network of foster homes in these rural communities. We'd provide the training, the supplies, and the support, and they'd provide the temporary housing until we can find permanent homes." Jason considered the idea. It would be a massive undertaking, but it made sense. Fostering could bridge the gap between surrender and adoption, giving more animals a chance at a better life. "Do you have anyone in mind who could help?" "I have a list of potential volunteers," Erin said, sliding the folder toward him. "I'd love for you to take a look and see if you know any of these folks. If we can get even a handful of people to start, we can build from there." Jason spent the rest of the morning reviewing the list and making calls. Some people were immediately enthusiastic, eager to open their homes to animals in need. Others were hesitant, unsure if they could handle the responsibility. But by the end of the day, they had a small but promising group of volunteers ready to give it a try. Duke and Ember seemed to sense the importance of this new initiative. Whenever Jason made another call or filled out another form, they stayed close by, as if offering silent encouragement. Duke would rest his head on Jason's knee, while Ember curled up in a chair nearby, her quiet presence a comforting reminder of why they were doing this work. As the weeks went by, the foster network began to take shape. Erin organized training sessions, and Jason helped deliver supplies. The first few placements were challenging. Some of the animals had medical issues, behavioral problems, or simply needed time to adjust to a home environment, but the foster families persevered, their determination fueled by the knowledge that they were making a real difference. Word spread quickly about the new program. Local newspapers ran stories highlighting the volunteers who had stepped up to help. The attention brought in more offers to foster, more donations, and more community support. What had started as a simple idea was rapidly becoming a vital lifeline for the animals in the region. Despite the success, Jason found himself struggling to keep up with the constant demands. The mobile unit still needed regular maintenance and staffing. The shelter was busier than ever, and now the foster program required oversight. He often worked late into the night, updating records, coordinating transports, and following up with foster families. He loved the work, but the exhaustion was starting to catch up with him. One evening, as Jason sat at his kitchen table going over paperwork, Sarah stopped by. She had been helping out at the shelter whenever she could, and she could tell Jason was running on fumes. "You need to take a break," she said, setting down a tray of homemade cookies. "You can't keep going like this without burning out." Jason leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. "I know, but there's just so much to do. If I don't keep at it, who will?" "Other people," Sarah said firmly. "You've built an incredible team. You don't have to do it all by yourself. Delegate, take a step back when you need to. You'll be more helpful in the long run if you're not running on empty." Her words hit home. Jason nodded slowly, realizing she was right. He couldn't keep pouring from an empty cup. The next day, he sat down with Erin and the other core volunteers to discuss how they could distribute the workload more evenly. They came up with a plan that allowed everyone to focus on their strengths and share responsibilities. It was a small but significant change that made a big difference. With the workload more balanced, Jason found himself able to enjoy the moments that mattered most. He spent more time playing with Duke and Ember, taking them on long walks through the snowy woods and watching as they romped through the drifts. He also started attending more community events, reconnecting with neighbors, and seeing firsthand the impact their efforts were having. One afternoon, as Jason stood in the town square helping set up for the annual winter festival, a woman approached him. She held a leash in one hand, and at the other end was a small terrier mix that had been adopted through the mobile unit just a month earlier. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice warm and sincere. "This little guy has brought so much joy to our family. We never would have found him without what you and your team are doing." Jason crouched down to pet the terrier, who wagged his tail happily. "You're welcome. I'm just glad we could help." As the festival got underway, Jason watched as families enjoyed the festivities. There were children laughing as they rode the carousel, couples sipping hot cocoa by the fire pits, and people stopping to pet Duke and Ember as they strolled through the square. It was moments like these that reminded Jason why they had started this journey in the first place. The winter months passed in a blur of activity and progress. The foster network grew stronger, the mobile unit continued to reach new communities, and the shelter became a model for other towns looking to improve their own animal services. Jason still worked hard, but he had learned to rely on his team and to take time for himself. He knew that the work would never truly be finished, but that was okay. They were making a difference, one life at a time. As spring approached, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings, Jason felt a renewed sense of hope. The challenges would keep coming, but so would the successes. And as long as he had Duke and Ember by his side, he knew he could handle whatever lay ahead. By the time the spring thaw arrived, the changes in Cedar Grove were impossible to ignore. The once sleepy town had transformed into a hub of activity, fueled by the dedication of its residents and the growing reputation of the animal shelter's programs. The foster network was thriving. The mobile adoption unit was reaching more communities than ever, and Duke and Ember had become local icons, symbols of hope and second chances. Jason stood in the shelter's main office one morning, sorting through the latest stack of adoption applications. The folder in his hands was thicker than ever, a testament to the growing interest in the shelter's work. As he flipped through the pages, he couldn't help but smile. Each form represented a life about to change, a family welcoming a new member, a lonely dog or cat finding a forever home, a fresh start for everyone involved. "You seem pretty pleased with yourself," Erin teased as she walked in carrying a mug of coffee. Jason looked up and grinned. Hard not to be when we're getting this kind of response. Erin set her mug down and picked up one of the applications. "It's amazing how far we've come. Remember when we used to have to beg people just to consider adopting? Now we can barely keep up with the demand." "It's a good problem to have," Jason said, "and it's all because of what we've built together." Erin glanced at Duke, who was lying in his usual spot near Jason's desk. "Or maybe it's because of him." Jason followed her gaze and chuckled. "Yeah, Duke definitely set the bar high. He showed everyone what real bravery looks like." As if on cue, Ember jumped onto the desk, her sleek fur catching the morning light. She nudged Jason's hand with her nose, her green eyes expectant. "And let's not forget the Queen," Jason said, giving Ember a scratch behind the ears. "She's become quite the ambassador." Erin smiled. "It's funny how it all started with those two. Who would have thought a dog running into a burning house and coming out with a kitten would lead to all of this?" Jason nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's like they knew, like they were meant to show us what we could accomplish if we just tried a little harder, cared a little more." "Speaking of trying harder," Erin said, reaching into her bag and pulling out another folder, "I wanted to run an idea by you. We've had so much success with the mobile adoption unit and the foster program that I think it's time to take the next step." Jason raised an eyebrow. "What kind of next step?" Erin opened the folder to reveal a series of charts and diagrams. "A permanent satellite location. There's a small property about 30 miles from here that used to be a veterinary clinic. It's been sitting vacant for a couple of years, but it has everything we need to expand our reach. Kennels, exam rooms, even a little outdoor space for the animals to exercise. If we can secure it, we could serve even more communities, cut down on transport times, and give the animals a better chance at finding homes." Jason leaned over the desk to get a closer look. "This would be huge. How soon can we make it happen?" "Well," Erin said, flipping through her notes, "the property is affordable, but it'll need some work. We'd have to clean it up, replace some equipment, maybe do a little remodeling. The good news is, we've got the funds from all the donations and grants we've received. The real challenge will be coordinating the renovations and getting the necessary permits." Jason rubbed his chin, considering the proposal. "I think it's worth it. It's a big step, but we've proven we can handle big challenges." Erin smiled. "I thought you'd say that. I'll start making calls and see what we can line up." Over the next few weeks, the shelter team threw themselves into the project. They organized volunteer cleanup crews, worked with contractors to assess the needed repairs, and navigated the maze of paperwork required to get the new location up and running. It was a lot to juggle, but Jason and Erin knew it would be worth it in the end. Duke and Ember, as always, were there every step of the way. Duke seemed to enjoy exploring the new property, sniffing every corner and wagging his tail, as if he could already envision the animals that would soon find safety there. Ember, on the other hand, was more selective. She perched on window sills, overseeing the progress with an air of authority, occasionally swiping at a stray piece of dust, as if to remind everyone of the standards they were setting. The community rallied around the project. Local businesses donated materials, skilled tradespeople offered their services at reduced rates, and residents pitched in on weekends to help clean and paint. Jason was constantly amazed by the outpouring of support. It was a reminder of how much had changed in Cedar Grove, how the town had come together, inspired by Duke and Ember's example, to create something truly special. As the renovations neared completion, Jason took a moment to step back and take it all in. Standing outside the building, he watched as volunteers carried in the last of the new equipment. The building, once empty and forgotten, now felt alive with possibility. Jason could already see it in his mind. Dogs wagging their tails as they met their new families. Cats purring contentedly in sunlit windows, people smiling as they welcomed their new companions. Erin joined him, her clipboard in hand. "Not bad, huh?" she said, following his gaze. "Not bad at all," Jason replied. "This place is going to make such a difference." "It already has," Erin said. "Look around, all these people, all this effort. It's more than just a building. It's a community coming together. It's hope." Jason nodded, his chest swelling with pride. It's amazing what we can do when we work together. The grand opening of the new satellite location was a celebration like no other. People from all over the region came to see the new facility, meet the animals, and hear the story of how it all began. Duke and Ember, of course, were the guests of honor. Children lined up to pet Duke and take pictures with Ember, who seemed to enjoy the attention despite her usual aloof demeanor. As Jason mingled with the crowd, he overheard countless conversations about how the shelter's work had touched people's lives. Families who had adopted from the mobile unit shared stories of how their new pets had brought them joy and comfort. Volunteers spoke about how the experience had brought them closer to their neighbors and given them a sense of purpose. Even those who had never owned a pet found themselves inspired by the shelter's mission and the community's commitment to making a difference. By the time the event wound down, Jason felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had taken another step forward, and though there was still much work to be done, the foundation they had built was stronger than ever. As he stood in the newly finished adoption room, looking at the rows of clean, comfortable kennels, Jason thought about how far they'd come. What had started as a single, extraordinary act of courage had grown into something much larger. A movement that had transformed not only Cedar Grove, but also the lives of countless animals and people beyond its borders. Duke trotted over and nudged Jason's hand, his tail wagging gently. Ember followed, hopping onto a nearby bench and fixing him with her steady gaze. Jason smiled, crouching down to stroke Duke's fur and scratch Ember behind the ears. "Look what we've built together," he said quietly. "And this is just the beginning." As he spoke, he felt a renewed sense of determination. The journey wasn't over, and that was okay. With Duke and Ember by his side, Jason knew they would continue to make a difference, one step at a time. Springtime in Cedar Grove brought a renewed sense of energy and possibility. The snow had long since melted, revealing lush greenery and blooming flowers along the town's winding streets. The shelter's new satellite location was running smoothly, and the foster network was stronger than ever. Jason felt a deep sense of pride every time he walked through the doors of the renovated facility. The kennels were filled with animals waiting for their chance at a forever home, and every day brought new adoptions, new beginnings. Duke and Ember had settled into their roles as unofficial mascots of the shelter. Duke's calm, friendly demeanor continued to put nervous animals and people alike at ease, while Ember's quiet presence was a reminder of the unexpected connections that could arise in even the most challenging circumstances. They were a constant source of inspiration, a living testament to the power of love and second chances. One morning, as Jason arrived at the shelter, he was met by Erin, who was standing by the front desk with a clipboard in hand. She looked both excited and slightly nervous, her brow furrowed as she reviewed the papers in front of her. "Good morning," Jason said, setting his bag down on the counter. "What's going on?" Erin looked up and smiled. "Good morning. I'm glad you're here. I wanted to talk to you about a new opportunity that's come our way." Jason raised an eyebrow. "New opportunity?" "Yeah," Erin said, flipping through her papers. "We've been approached by a regional animal welfare organization. They're impressed by what we've accomplished here, especially with the foster program and the mobile adoption unit. They want to partner with us to expand our reach even further." Jason leaned against the counter, intrigued. How would that work? "They'd provide funding, additional resources, and access to their network of experts," Erin explained. "In return, we'd help them replicate our programs in other communities. It's a chance to make an even bigger impact." Jason considered the proposal. It sounded like a natural next step, but he knew it would come with challenges. "What's the catch?" Erin hesitated. "Well, we'd have to travel more, hold training sessions, and commit to a higher level of accountability. It's a big responsibility, but I think we're ready for it." Jason nodded slowly. "If it means helping more animals and supporting more communities, then it's worth considering. But we'll need to make sure we have enough manpower and time to handle the extra workload." "Exactly," Erin said. "I wanted to run it by you before we move forward. I trust your judgment, and I know you'll be honest about whether we're ready for this step." Jason appreciated her confidence in him. He thought about everything they had achieved so far, about the strength of their team and the passion of their volunteers. While it would be a significant commitment, he believed they could rise to the challenge. "I think we should go for it," Jason said finally. "Let's meet with them and see what the partnership would entail. If it's as good as it sounds, we can figure out how to make it work." Erin smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Thanks, Jason. I'll set up the meeting and let you know the details." As Erin walked away, Jason glanced over at Duke, who was lounging in his usual spot by the window. Duke looked up, his tail thumping lazily against the floor. Jason couldn't help but smile. Duke had taught him that sometimes taking a leap of faith was worth the risk. The meeting with the regional organization took place a week later. Jason, Erin, and a few key volunteers gathered in the shelter's conference room, joined by representatives from the organization. They discussed logistics, goals, and the potential benefits of the partnership. By the end of the meeting, Jason felt more confident than ever that this was the right move. Over the next several months, the shelter team worked closely with the regional organization to roll out new programs and training initiatives. Jason found himself traveling to neighboring towns, sharing their experiences and helping other shelters establish foster networks and mobile adoption units. It was hard work, but it was also deeply rewarding. Each time he returned to Cedar Grove, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing they were making a difference far beyond their own community. Duke and Ember continued to play a central role in these efforts. Duke accompanied Jason on many of his trips, his calm presence helping to break down barriers and put people at ease. Ember stayed closer to home, but her story was shared in every presentation and training session. Her resilience and the bond she shared with Duke were a reminder of why they were doing this work. The partnership brought new challenges, but it also brought new opportunities. the shelter received grants to improve their facilities, hire additional staff, and expand their programs. They established spay and neuter clinics, offered behavioral training for foster animals, and started educational programs in local schools. The impact was tangible: fewer animals in need, more successful adoptions, and a stronger, more compassionate community. As the seasons changed once again, Jason found himself reflecting on everything they had accomplished. What had started as a single act of courage had grown into a movement that touched thousands of lives. The shelter was no longer just a place where animals were cared for. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of community and the enduring spirit of a dog and a cat who had shown the world what was possible. And as long as Jason had Duke and Ember by his side, he knew there were no limits to what they could achieve. As summer unfolded in Cedar Grove, the town buzzed with activity. Children raced their bikes along tree-lined streets, local farmers set up produce stands at the weekend market, and the shelter's newest initiatives were gaining momentum. The partnership with the Regional Animal Welfare Organization had brought in more resources than Jason and Erin had ever dreamed possible. With additional funding and manpower, they were making real strides not only in the local community, but also in neighboring towns. Jason spent much of his time on the road now, traveling between shelters, foster homes, and training sessions. Each visit reinforced his belief in what they were doing. He met people who were inspired to start their own rescue networks, saw animals who had found loving homes, and witnessed entire communities coming together to create change. It was exhausting work, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Back in Cedar Grove, Erin oversaw the day-to-day operations at the main shelter and the satellite location. She had become a trusted leader, respected not only by the volunteers and staff, but also by the townsfolk who saw her as a symbol of the shelter's success. Under her guidance, the foster program continued to expand, with more families opening their homes to animals in need. The mobile adoption unit was now a familiar sight in the region, greeted with excitement wherever it went. Despite the packed schedule, Jason always made time for Duke and Ember. Duke remained his steadfast companion on many of his trips, providing comfort and support wherever they went. Ember, ever the queen of the shelter, had become a fixture at the main location. She strolled through the office and kennels with an air of authority, her presence a calming influence on both animals and people. Volunteers often joked that Ember was the real boss of the shelter, and Jason suspected they weren't entirely wrong. One afternoon, Jason returned to the Cedar Grove shelter after a long trip to a town a couple of hours away. As he walked through the doors, Duke at his side, he was greeted by the cheerful chaos of a busy adoption day. Families filled the lobby, children giggled as they played with puppies, and staff members bustled about, helping match animals with their new homes. Jason felt a swell of pride seeing how far they'd come. "Hey, you're back," Erin called from behind the front desk. "How'd it go?" Jason leaned on the counter and smiled. "Good. They're off to a solid start. They've got a few kinks to work out, but the potential is definitely there." Erin nodded, then glanced around the crowded lobby. "It's been like this all day. I think we're going to set another adoption record." Jason grinned. "That's what I like to hear." As the afternoon wore on, Jason helped where he could, guiding families through the adoption process and introducing them to the animals. He loved seeing the connections form, how a shy dog would light up when a child knelt down to pet them, or how a cat who had been reserved suddenly purred contentedly in someone's arms. It reminded him why they did what they did. Later that evening, after the last family had left and the shelter had quieted down, Jason sat on the porch with Duke and Ember. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the yard, and the sounds of crickets filled the air. Jason leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the day's work melt away. "Not a bad day, huh?" he said, scratching behind Duke's ears. Duke wagged his tail in agreement. Ember hopped onto Jason's lap, curling up and letting out a soft purr. Jason smiled, knowing that no matter how busy things got, these moments of peace were what kept him going. As summer turned to autumn, the shelter continued to thrive. The regional partnership had exceeded everyone's expectations, and Jason and Aaron found themselves invited to conferences and events where they shared their successes and inspired others to take action. Their story had become a rallying cry for the animal welfare community, proving that even a small-town shelter could have a big impact. At one such conference, held in a nearby city, Jason took the stage to deliver a keynote speech. The audience was filled with shelter directors, rescue volunteers, and animal lovers from across the region. As he spoke about the journey that had brought them here, about Duke's heroics, Ember's resilience, and the community's unwavering support, he could see the spark of inspiration in their eyes. People approached him afterward, eager to learn more and share their own stories. Jason left the event feeling more motivated than ever. Back in Cedar Grove, the shelter received a steady stream of visitors who had heard about their work and wanted to see it for themselves. Some came to adopt, others to volunteer, and still others simply to meet Duke and Ember. The pair had become local legends, their story a source of pride for the entire town. Even the mayor, who had initially been skeptical about the shelter's expansion efforts, publicly praised their achievements and pledged continued support. As the leaves began to change and the air grew cooler, the shelter prepared for its annual fall festival, a tradition that had started as a small fundraiser years ago and had since become one of Cedar Grove's most anticipated events. The festival was a celebration of the community's commitment to animals, featuring pet adoption booths, agility demonstrations, and even a costume contest for pets and their owners. Jason loved seeing the joy on people's faces as they connected with the animals and each other. Duke and Ember, of course, were the stars of the festival. Duke trotted around with a red bandana tied around his neck, while Ember perched regally on a specially decorated float in the festival parade. Children squealed with delight as they saw their favorite four-legged heroes, and parents snapped photos to capture the memory. Amid the festivities, Jason took a moment to reflect on how much their work had grown. The shelter was no longer just a place to house animals. It was a community hub, a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together for a common cause. Jason felt a deep sense of gratitude for everyone who had been part of this journey, from the volunteers and foster families to the staff and supporters who had made it all possible. As the festival wound down and the sun dipped below the horizon, Jason stood by the shelter's entrance, watching families walk away with their new pets, their laughter and chatter filling the crisp evening air. Duke sat at his side, his tail wagging slowly, while Ember rested in her usual spot on Jason's shoulder. Jason couldn't help but smile, knowing that this was what it was all about, bringing people and animals together, creating a sense of belonging and love. And though there was still much work to be done, Jason felt more confident than ever that they were on the right path. With Duke and Ember by his side, he knew they could handle whatever came next. The crisp autumn air settled over Cedar Grove, a gentle reminder that the year was drawing to a close. The town, however, was alive with activity. The shelter was busier than ever, its kennels and adoption rooms filled with animals eagerly awaiting their new homes. The partnership with the regional organization continued to flourish, and Jason found himself reflecting on just how far they had come. Jason arrived at the shelter early one morning, Duke at his side as always. The pair walked through the front doors to find Erin already at the desk, a stack of paperwork spread out before her. She looked up and greeted Jason with a tired but warm smile. "Morning," Jason said, giving Duke a pat on the head. "Busy already?" "Always," Erin replied, pushing a clipboard toward him. "I've got a list of potential adopters we need to follow up with. There's been a lot of interest since the fall festival." Jason glanced over the list and nodded. "That's a good problem to have." "Definitely," Erin said. "It's amazing how much support we've gained. It feels like every day we're helping more animals find homes, reaching more people, making more of a difference." Jason leaned against the counter, watching as a volunteer walked by, carrying a sleepy kitten wrapped in a warm blanket. "I couldn't have imagined this a year ago. It's all grown into something bigger than I ever expected." Erin nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And it all started with Duke and Ember. Their story reminded everyone what's possible. It showed people that even the smallest act of kindness can ripple outward and change so many lives." Jason looked down at Duke, who wagged his tail and gazed back up at him. "Yeah," Jason said. "They really did." The day unfolded in its usual rhythm: adoption meetings, volunteer coordination, and phone calls with foster families. But there was an energy in the air that felt different, as if the community's collective effort was building toward something even greater. Jason noticed it in the way people greeted each other, in the determination on the faces of the volunteers, in the small but heartfelt notes left by adopters, thanking the shelter for bringing joy into their lives. As the sun began to set, Jason took a break from his desk and walked outside with Duke. They wandered down the quiet streets of Cedar Grove, the cool evening air filled with the scent of fallen leaves. Jason thought about how much had changed since that fateful night when Duke ran into the burning house. What started as a single act of courage had grown into a movement that touched not just the town, but also the lives of countless people and animals beyond its borders. As they walked past the park, Jason spotted a family playing fetch with their dog, a dog they'd adopted from the shelter months ago. The young boy laughed as the dog bounded after the ball, his parents smiling as they watched. Jason felt a swell of pride, knowing he'd played a part in that moment. Returning to the shelter, Jason found Erin waiting for him in the office. She held a folder, her expression both serious and excited. "I've got some news," she said. "Good news, I hope?" Jason asked, taking a seat. "The best," Erin replied. "The regional organization wants to recognize our shelter at their annual gala. They're giving us an award for our work and for the programs we've created. They specifically mentioned you, Duke, and Ember as the heart of everything we've accomplished." Jason blinked, momentarily taken aback. That's incredible. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll be there," Erin said with a grin. "It's a big deal, Jason. You deserve this." Jason hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be there, but only if Duke and Ember can come too." "Of course," Erin said, laughing. "They wouldn't have it any other way." The weeks leading up to the gala were a whirlwind of activity. Between preparing for the event and keeping the shelter running smoothly, Jason barely had a moment to himself. But every time he felt overwhelmed, he looked at Duke and Ember and remembered why he was doing this. They had inspired him to push through challenges before, and they continued to inspire him now. On the night of the gala, Jason donned his best suit, something he hadn't worn in years, and arrived at the venue with Duke and Ember. Duke wore a simple blue bandana around his neck, and Ember had a small, tasteful bow attached to her collar. The sight of them brought smiles to everyone they encountered, and Jason couldn't help but feel a bit of pride in how far they had all come. As the ceremony began, the room was filled with animal welfare advocates, shelter directors, and volunteers from across the region. Jason listened as speakers shared their stories, each one a testament to the power of compassion and community. When it was finally his turn to take the stage, he felt a nervous flutter in his chest. But as he walked to the podium with Duke and Ember by his side, the applause from the audience eased his nerves. "Thank you," Jason began, his voice steady. "I'm truly honored to accept this award on behalf of everyone at the Cedar Grove shelter. But more than that, I'm humbled by what we've been able to accomplish together." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "It all started with a dog and a kitten. Duke and Ember reminded us that even in the darkest moments there's light. Even when things seem impossible, there's hope. They showed us that courage, love, and kindness can transform lives." Jason glanced down at Duke, whose tail wagged gently, and then at Ember, who was perched gracefully on the podium. "This award isn't just for me or for our shelter. It's for the volunteers who give their time, for the families who open their homes, and for the animals who teach us what it means to truly care. Together, we've built something incredible, and I can't wait to see where we go from here." The audience erupted in applause as Jason stepped down from the stage, his heart full. He returned to his seat, where Aaron was beaming and the rest of the team was cheering. Duke settled at his feet, and Ember curled up in his lap, her purr audible even over the applause. After the gala, as Jason drove back to Cedar Grove with Duke and Ember, he reflected on everything that had brought them to this moment. The challenges, the triumphs, the people who had joined them along the way. It had all been worth it. And while the work would never be finished, Jason felt at peace, knowing they had made a lasting impact. As they pulled into the driveway of the shelter, Jason looked back at Duke and Ember and smiled. "We've done good," he said softly. Duke wagged his tail in agreement, and Ember stretched out, her green eyes meeting his for a brief, meaningful moment. Jason stepped out of the car, letting the cool night air wash over him. The shelter was quiet now, but it was alive with the promise of more lives to change, more stories to tell. He knew that as long as he had Duke and Ember by his side, he would keep going, keep striving to make a difference. And with that thought, Jason closed the car door, placed his hand on Duke's head, and walked toward the shelter, ready for whatever came next.